Dear students, today in this video, we will look into the topic General Principles of Transfer of Property Law. So before going into the general principles, we will look into the history that why this act was enacted. So before 1882, so the Transfer of Property Act was enacted on the first day of July 1882. So before 1882, the transfers of immovable properties in India were governed by the principle of English law, the equity, and by the regulation and acts passed by the Governor General and Council at that period of time. So in that time, law was quite confusing at that period of time. So we had enacted a law termed the Transfer of Property Act 1882, which came into force from the first day of July 1882. So the preamble of the act is an act to amend the law relating to the transfer of property by act of parties. So as this act deals only with the inter vivos transfer. So that was one of the major reasons to amend the law relating to the transfer of property. And the one of the object was to bring the rules which regulate the transmission of property between living persons into harmony, with the rules affecting its devolution upon death, and thus to the complement the work that commenced with framing of the law to interstate and testamentary succession, and to complete the code of law of contract so far as relates to immovable property. So during the period, during 1882, we had the Indian Contract Act 1872. So the Indian Contract Act was enacted in the year 1872, which dealt with the movable properties. So even before that, even before 1872, we didn't have any law even for the movable as well as the immovable properties concerned. So at that period of time, everything was followed by the General Government Council or any other acts or regulations which was there as of that date during the British rule. So that is one of the problems which we faced in the initial stage. So even if we look into the term being used for the preamble, that was to amend the law relating to the transfer of property by act of parties. So there was a requirement to bring in a law, to create the harmony with the rules. There were lots of rules. General Government Council in law, certain regulations were there, certain acts were there, certain rules and regulations, certain precedents given by the English courts. Lots of confusion was there. So to settle those things, to settle and bring out a harmony within the rules, which looked into the matter of transfer of property of the immovable property. So that was the major preamble, or sorry, that was the major objective to bring in this law. And as I said you, that we had the Indian Contract Act 1872, which dealt with the movable property. Then in the year 1930, that was repealed. Those sections were repealed from the Indian Contract Act, and we brought in a new law termed as the Sales of Goods Act 1930. So from 1872 till 1930, it was the Contract Act which dealt with the movable properties. And from 1872 till 1882, we didn't have any proper law as of the immovable properties concerned. So that was one of the major reasons to bring. That was also one of the major reasons to bring in a law which specifically deals with the immovable property, an action which is done by the act of parties alone. So any other testamentary succession and all those things, we have different laws, different religious laws, different family laws we have, which deals with those things. So this is a pie chart of the Transfer of Property Act. So we can divide it into two. A transfer can be done in two ways. One is by the act of parties, that is the inter vivos transfer, and the next is by operation of law, that is succession, insolvency, or execution petition and all. And by act of parties, it can be done in two ways. One is the testamentary, that is after the death of parties, or we can call it as will. And the second is inter vivos, that is between two living persons. So a transfer being done between two or more living person is called as inter vivos transfer. And the next is the inter vivos transfer can be divided into two. One is transfer of immovable or movable property. That is one part in the law. There are certain sections which deals with movable property also. So it is not an exception totally that this law totally talks about the immovable property alone. There are few sections which even talks about or which even gives the rights as of a movable property is concerned. And there is another part in the law which talks about only the transfer of immovable property that can be classified as sale, mortgage, lease, exchange, gift, actionable claim, etc. So these are the particular immovable properties which are there in the Transfer of Property Act. So, as I said you, one is by the act of parties and the other is by operation of law. So, by operation of law, we mean that anything like any transfer has to take place, but there is already a law. Indian Succession Act is there, insolvency law is there, or something has to be executed, then you have the executory laws and all those things are there. Then that is done by the operation of law. And if it is by an act of parties where the involvement of a party is necessary, because as of operation of law is there, the law takes the charge. The law determines what has to be done. The law determines the property has to be vested with which party. But when it is by an act of party, the party determines. It is the party's will that to whom he or she wants to give the gift. Then it can be either by the testamentary one, where after the death of the parties, it takes place. So after the death of the parties, when something has to be taken place, then it can be only a will. So when someone writes a will in favor of someone and dies, then later on the will can be executed on the person in whose favor the will has been written. And the next is the inter vivos transfer. That is between two or more living persons. So any transfer which takes place to or more living person comes under the purview of Transfer of Property Act. And as I said you, movable properties concepts are also there. So the transfer of immovable as well as movable property also comes under inter vivos transfer. And specifically, there are certain transfer which takes place only of the immovable property. Those are sale, mortgage, lease, exchange, gift. Sale takes place even for movable properties. We day to day we go to a shop, buy something and come out, right? So that is a sale of a movable property. So for that we have the Sales of Goods Act, which determine what is sale in the context of movable property. But sale in a context of immovable property, where you are buying some land, some buildings, or some shops and all, then that comes under the purview of the Transfer of Property Act, like how it has to be executed, where you can go and register. So Registration Act is there, which will determine the stamp duties, stamp duty acts we have, all those things. There are certain other laws which looks into the registration process, but this will determine the rights and liabilities, how a sale has to be done, how a sale has to be executed, and the rights and liabilities of the seller and the buyer, and before sale, after sale, all these things comes here. And when it comes to mortgage, we can will be looking into the definition of mortgage. What is mortgage? The different types of mortgage, like English mortgage, anomalous mortgage, mortgage by conditional sale, mortgage by deposit of title deeds, etc. And when it comes to lease, even in the mortgage, we will be looking into the rights of mortgager and the rights of mortgage. Same with lease, we will look into the determination of a lease, how a lease is determined, whether it is determined on a yearly basis or a monthly basis. And also when it comes to normal purpose, when it comes to residential purpose and all, it is determined monthly. But when it comes to some manufacturing unit, some industrial purposes and all, then it is determined by way of yearly basis or 6 months basis, or yearly twice on that basis for manufacturing as well as for the agricultural purposes. It is determined in that way. Then when it comes to exchange, how exchange can be done, and gift. So gift might somewhere down the line look a bit of the bill, because even in bill you don't get any consideration at all. Same happens here also, there is no consideration, but that takes place after the death of the parties, but gift has to take place when both the parties are alive, when the transferor as well as the transferee is alive, then only the gift can be taken into place. But it is not a complete code. The Transfer of Property Act, it is not a complete code. There are certain lacunas which are being addressed, like being got in the intellectual property law, which talks about after the classification of tangible, intangible properties at all. Now we have brought in a new law which talks about the intellectual property rights, like the patent, the copyright, the trademark, the design, all those things. So it is not a complete code. The Transfer of Property Act does not deal about all the immovable properties. Okay. And so it is not an exhaustive in nature. And it is not applicable to all types of transfer of property, because we have seen it, right? It does not apply for all the types of transfer of property. So that is, here we mean even the movable as well as the immovable. So it does not deal with every kinds of transfer of property. And it is applicable only for the inter vivos transfer between two or more living person alone. This code is applied. And some of the provisions like easement is out of the provision or the purview of this act. Easement plays a very major role as of a land is concerned. But we have a separate law for it. We have the Indian Easement Act 1882 for it. So as we said, that this is not a complete code. So if it would have been a complete code, even the concept of easement could have been added to this Transfer of Property Act 1882 itself. But we have a separate law which was enacted in the same year. It was enacted in the same year, 1882 itself, Indian Easement Act 1882. That's what we term it as, that it is not a complete code. And there are other laws also, like you have the contract, the Sales of Goods Act, the intellectual property, the registration, the stamp duty, etc. So it is not that feasible, because when you look into the stamp duties, values, the registration and all, it differs from state to state. Stamp duties, values and all, it differs from state to state. The procedure differs from state to state. The process differs from state to state, and how it takes place. So we have different laws. We have different laws for that. So when we look into the term property, it is derived from the Latin term proprietariat, and the French equivalent term is propres, which means a thing owned or possessed. So an immovable property does not include a standing timber, growing crops, or grass. So we will be looking at a later part about the immovable property. After I classify the different types of property, I'll be going in depth at what is an immovable property as per this law, as per the Transfer of Property Act 1882. So it is a right to possess, use, or enjoy, or dispose. Any commercial exploitation can be done, and the property can be tangible as well as it can be an intangible property. So that is one, that the property can be tangible or intangible in nature. And the property extends to every species of valuable and interest, including real and personal property, easements and franchises, etc. And it is unrestricted and exclusive right to a thing. And property is a legal concept which includes a bundle of rights. And property means a proprietary right in rem or else in personam also. So right in rem as well as right in personam is there as a property is concerned. So now we will look into the kinds of property. So one of the kind is real property. So this property admits of specific recovery, and as this originally allowed only where the claimant had freehold interest. Examples in lands and buildings, etc. And personal property, it comprises of goods or things movable in such property in respect of which only a personal action law was classed as personal property. So real property then is something where you have the lands, the buildings and all. And as of the personal property is concerned, where only a personal action can be taken, the part, then it is called as a personal property. And next is tangible property. This types of properties can be felt or touched. You can feel the property, you can touch the property, then it is called as tangible property. So if I give you a water bottle, you can feel it, you can touch it, you can know the shape of the water bottle, you can know the color of the water bottle. These are tangible property. Any property which can be felt or touched is called as tangible property. And any property which cannot be felt or untouched is called as intangible property. So let's say if I tell you copyright, you have published an article, you have got a copyright. But whether you feel it? No. Whether you can touch it? No. You possess, you have that article in your hand, but you don't have the copyright in your hand, right? You have the copyright in the article, but you don't have anything which you can touch and say that this is copyright. You can say that I have a copyright on this article, but you can never say that this is copyright, or how it feels. What is the size of copyright? What is the color of copyright? What is the color of patent? You cannot say that, right? So those properties are called as the intangible properties, and the intellectual property law deals with these intangible property. And the tangible or intangible property may be movable as well as immovable in nature, depending upon the circumstances. And movable property, it is goods or things which are movable in nature. So any goods which can be moved from one place to another will be called as a movable property. So any property, let's say a telephone or a mobile phone, you can move it from one place to another, then it is a movable property. This is the general definition given for a movable property and an immovable property, or a literal meaning of the term movable and immovable, which we would have studied till date. That any property which can be moved from one place to another is movable, and any property which cannot be moved from one place to another is immovable. So what about the chair in the house, chair in the classroom? Whether it is movable or immovable, we will say it is movable. You can move it from one place to another. What about the television? It is a movable property. It can move from one place to another. What about the ceiling fan? It is movable. It can be moved from one place to another. These are the literal meaning which we give, just depending upon the term that whether a property can be moved or not. We will say tree is an immovable property because it cannot be moved from one place to another. This is how we have studied till date. But the Transfer of Property Act gives a clear definition, gives out a different opinion as of the immovable property and the movable properties is concerned. So it says it is any property which is permanently fixed and cannot be moved is an immovable property. But as per section 3 of the Act, we have to go and refer section 3 of the Transfer of Property Act 1882 to have a more in-depth meaning of the term immovable property, because this is one of the major term as of the Transfer of Property Act 1882 is concerned, because the Act deals majorly with the immovable property. So we need to be very clear as of the definition of immovable property is concerned. So immovable property, it does not include standing timber, growing crops or grass. This is as per section 3 of this Act of the Transfer of Property Act. So it says does not include the standing timber, the growing crops or grass. So it says that even a tree is not an immovable property if it is a standing timber. So the purpose of growing the tree was to cut it down to get the woods. Then it is a movable property and not an immovable property. So what was your intention while planting it? To get shade, it is an immovable property. To get benefits from the tree, just to get the fruits of the tree, it is an immovable property. You didn't had any opinion, you have just planted it. It is an immovable property. But now your intention is to get the timbers, to get the woods from the property, to get the woods from the tree. That was your clear-cut intention while planting it. Then it is a movable property. Now just see the literal meaning which we have studied till date. That is, it can be moved from one place to another, it is movable. It cannot be moved from one place to another, it is immovable. This is what we have studied till date. But this law says if something is affixed or if something is put in to get the timber, to get the woods, then it is an immovable property. The definition is very clear that it does not, immovable property does not include standing timber, growing crops or grass. So if you have grown some crops, some wheat, rice and all those are movable properties. So it cannot be moved from one place to another, though you can pluck it and move it, that's a different part. It's attached to the earth. It is attached with the earth itself. The roots are attached with the earth. But the purpose is to get the grains, to get the crops, to get the rice, to get the wheat from the crops. So then it is movable property. And the definition is not clear and it is incomplete because it just says that it does not include the standing timber, growing crops and grass. It does not say what it includes. The definition is not clear as of what are the things, what are the properties which is an immovable property. There is no examples given or there is no explanation given as of this part is concerned. So to get a more clear opinion with the help of other statutes, we will refer certain other laws. The General Clauses Act 1897. So the General Clauses Act defines immovable property and it says that it shall include land, benefits to arise out of land and things attached to the earth or permanently fastened to anything attached to the earth. So this is one of the act which defines immovable property. And we have another act, that is the Registration Act 1908, which also defines the immovable property. And it says immovable property includes the lands, the buildings, the hereditary allowances, the right to ways, lights, ferries, fisheries, or any other benefits to arise out of lands and things attached to the earth or permanently fastened to anything which is attached to the earth but not standing timber, growing crops and grass. So out of these three acts, it is the Registration Act which gives exhaust, or which gives a more inclusive definition, because it includes the certain elements given under the Transfer of Property Act Section 3. That is, it does not include that part, also comes under the Registration Act definition, and as well as the benefits arising out of land and anything attached to the earth, and all the things which has been said under the General Clauses Act 1897 has also been included in the definition given under the Registration Act 1908. So we can classify, after looking into these three definitions given by three different acts, we can we can bring out a clear-cut definition of what is immovable property. Then it will be, immovable property includes the lands, the benefits to arise out of lands, and the things attached to earth. And what is things attached to earth? When we say land, we can easily say that we can mean the surface of the earth. The surface of the earth is the land. So it includes everything upon the surface of the land. So if I say I'm giving you this 1 acre, I'm selling this 1 acre to you. I'm selling this 1 acre land to you. Let's say there are some 10 trees in that and one house. But when I say that I'm selling this 1 acre land to you, it means that I'm selling that house as well as that 10 trees to you. So land means the surface of the earth, and it includes everything upon the surface of the land. So under the surface of the land and whatever is under it. So let's say it has some water. Then even that water, you're the owner of that water also. You can get the water from the land also. So anything which is upon the surface as well as under the surface of the land, and also the above the surface of the land. As I said, your house and all. So anything which is above the surface of the land is also comes under the purview of land. So the land includes a determinate portion of land. So you have to be determinate, like which part you want. So let's say I have 1 acre, I want to sell only half the acre. So I'll say half the acre of from this direction or that direction, or adjacent to this land, or adjacent to the main road, whatever, by classifying the property, that which part I want to sell it off, by making a clear amended, like a clear cut picture, like which part of the property I'm going to sell, the land which I'm going to sell, and the ground beneath the surface. As I said, anything which is under the surface also. So like it includes the soil, it includes the mud, it includes the underground water, it includes the water if it is collected in a pit, or let's say if any pond is there, or any lake is there, or any well is there, or the subsoil, the mineral, or let's say if it has a coal, or let's say it has a gold, or anything, all those things, and the space above the land, all those things comes under the land. The second is the benefits to arise out of land. So it includes all the benefits which arises out of the land. So benefits means a person gets from the land is also an immovable property. So it is intangible immovable property. So a right by exercise of which a person gets certain benefits is called beneficial right or beneficial interest of that person. So it can be any profit or gain from the land. So let's say a right of way, or a right to use, or a lease, or a tenancy, or a right of a fishery, or a right of a ferry, or a hereditary office, or a fruits. All these are immovable properties. So any benefits which arises out of land. So let's say you are getting some rent income. You'll put it under the head, though income, that as of that income, money is there, it is movable. You can move it from one place to another, right? But the income is from immovable properties. You got that benefit. The benefit has arisen from an immovable property. So that is called as benefits to arise out of land. What are the benefits which have arisen of the land? Or let's say the fishery rights. So let's say you have got a right to fish in a particular pond or a particular lake as a lease for a period of a time. Let's say for some 6 months and all. Then those things are also be termed as immovable properties. And the last is things attached to earth. So that is things embedded in the earth. Things attached to earth can include things embedded in the earth. It can also include things attached to the earth, to what is so embedded in the earth. And it can also say the things rooted in earth, except the standing timber, growing crops, or growing grass. So if there is a tree which is not a standing timber, or any crops which is not a growing crops, or anything which is not growing grass, and it has its roots embedded in the earth, then it is an immovable property. Anything which is embedded in the earth is an immovable property. Anything which is attached to the things which is embedded is also an immovable property. So let's say a land is an immovable property. You cannot move it from one place to another. Let's say a house built in the land is also an immovable property. We have seen that anything above the surface of the land also comes under the purview of land, right? So the building is also an immovable property. What about the gates? What about the doors in the property? Let's say it has some 10 bolts and nuts, you can just remove it and the door comes out, right? The doors can be easily moved away. The doors can be easily removed. The windows can be easily removed. What about those things? Those things are the things which is attached to what is so embedded in the earth. It is attached to the building which is embedded in the earth. So automatically this door becomes an immovable property. Though you can move it from one place to another, it becomes an immovable property. What about the fan? The ceiling fan. So now what you have to look into the concept is whether it is attached here for a permanent time or it is only for a temporary period of time. So while determining something which is in the property, so when we look into the sale, we can easily say that when you sell a house, you sell everything. Before that, whatever rights you want to get, you can get it. But once you say that you have sold the property, whatever it is, even the doors, the keys, or if you have left out the windows, everything comes under the property. Everything is being sold in that transfer. Everything is sold in that particular transfer of property. So anything which is embedded to the earth or anything which is attached to what embedded to the earth. So a door is attached to the building which is embedded to the earth. The fan is attached to the building which is embedded to the earth. The fan is for a temporary period of time. It is a movable property. So you have to look into the purpose of the attachment. A door, we are not going to remove it on a daily basis. We are not going to remove it from time to time. We are not going to remove it on a daily basis. But let's say you have put up a table fan in your house. That the table fan can be easily moved from one place to another. It is not attached to anything, right? You just plug in, you just use it, and you just switch off the fan. That's it. It is not attached to any one particular place. It is a movable property. But now what you're doing is you're buying a wall mounted fan. You're just attached to the wall of your building. And it is for a permanent structure. It's for a permanent usage. Then that wall mount fan becomes an immovable property. The air conditioner you have attached in your house, in your room, it is an immovable property because it is for a permanent usage. So let's say the bench in the classrooms, it is movable property. It can be moved from one place to another. It can be easily moved from one place to another. It can be moved here and there. It can be moved from one class to the other class. So it is a movable property, right? But what is the purpose of the bench? Let's say this bench will be always in this class. A permanent usage for this class is there, right? Yes. But whether it is attached to the earth, attached to the building, no, it is still a movable property. But let's say what we are doing is we are just fixing the bolts and nuts. We are just fixing the furniture with the floor of the classrooms firmly with the help of the nuts and bolts. So you cannot move it. You cannot move it from one place to another in your classroom. So the bench, which is for let's say the first year students, it will be always there in the first year classroom alone. It is not that when the first year student goes to the second year, he will take his or her bench with him, right? It is permanently affixed, attached with the earth. Then that bench becomes an immovable property because it is there for a permanent usage. So let's say we are organizing some function. So obviously we will be getting some chairs or an air conditioner and all. All this is only for a temporary period of time. Though it is attached, though it is embedded with the building, or though it is embedded in the earth itself, but it is for a small period of time. It is not for a long period of time. Then it becomes a movable property. So you have to look into these things to determine what is a property, whether it is an immovable property or a movable property. So movable property is very simple. A property which is not immovable is a movable property. So you have to determine whether it is immovable or not. So if it falls into any of these things, the lands, the benefits arising out of lands, or anything attached to the earth, or anything attached to what is so embedded in the earth, or anything which is embedded in the earth, then it is an immovable. And if it does not falls into any of these categories, then that becomes a movable property. Few examples are, let's say, the standing timber, the growing crops, or the growing grass, or anything which is placed on the earth, or the royalty, copyright. These things becomes the movable property. So the differentiation between movable and immovable, we can say all interest which are the interest in the object other than the land are called movable property, and all interest which are interest in the land are called movable. And it can be easily, like movable property can be easily shifted from or moved without any loss or damage. But the immovable property cannot be easily shifted, or it cannot be easily transported without any loss or damage to the immovable property. Because nowadays you can even lift a house from one place to another. The technology has grown. So we cannot totally say that immovable property cannot be moved from one place to another, but there will be some loss, there will be some damage to the property, or the cost will be high rather when it comes to moving a movable property, or when it comes to moving an immovable property. And the movable property is liable for the sales tax and all, and the immovable property is liable for the stamp duties and all when it comes for the sale. And the registration is optional when it comes to movable property. But any property more than ₹100, the registration is mandatory as of the immovable properties concerned. And as of a mere movable property is there, mere delivery with the intention to transfer or to complete, the transfer is completed. But mere delivery is not sufficient, because the transfer must be registered as of an immovable property concerned. So instrument in which way it is registered, it comes under the Registration Act and all. So instrument means a legal document. So where a property is transferred through a written document, that document will be called as an instrument. And we have attested also where, depending upon the law, certain persons are required to attest and certify the document, or sometimes it's a registrar who has to attest and certify the documents. So with this, we have finished this video lecture on the topic General Principles of Transfer of Property Act. Thank you, students.